Hi there, it is February 10th, 2022, and I wanted to put together a short video to discuss a recent geologic, I guess event is the right word, but something that popped up in the news that I noticed, and I wanted to maybe shed a little bit of light on it and to those that are interested. So the area that we're going to look at here today is in Central Oregon, and there's been news lately regarding one of the volcanoes in the Cascade Range. In the Cascade Range, this trend of north-south volcanoes running through the Pacific Northwest exists because off the coast of Western North America, we have a subduction zone where one plate's diving beneath the other. And that is the reason we have this string of volcanoes extending from Mount Shasta in Northern California all the way up into southern British Columbia. Of course, the most famous volcano in the chain is Mount St. Helens, which erupted violently in 1980. It also erupted in the early and mid-2000s, but with less violent type of eruptive behavior. And so this is a string of stratovolcanoes that run through the Pacific Northwest, the Cascades. And stratovolcanoes are kind of characterized by alternating eruptive behaviors that range from explosive to more effusive, meaning that they just sort of ooze out kind of thick, pasty lava. And so when those magmas beneath the volcanoes can trap sufficient gases in the magma chamber, that pressure can build until you finally get an explosive eruption like what we saw in 1980 with Mount St. Helens. So we know these volcanoes are potentially hazardous and dangerous. Thankfully, they don't erupt very often, so it's not an overly pressing concern, but it's definitely something to watch and monitor. And so the one we're going to look at in particular lies just to the west of Bend, Oregon. There's actually a series of 3 volcanoes called the Three Sisters. The North Sister, this one's not labeled here, but this is the Middle Sister and the South Sister. And the South Sister is the one that's kind of been getting some of the news lately. So you can see it's kind of cone-shaped. There's a crater on top. It sits over 10,000 feet in elevation. I think the last eruption here at the South Sister was a little over 2,000 years ago, when it produced thick, pasty, rhyolitic lavas, but it also produced ash as well, and some pyroclastic flows that covered the adjacent area. So the news story is that parts of the South Sister are showing evidence of uplifting. And let me show you kind of what that looks like. And so this is the South Sister here, this white triangle. And this is all from the USGS, who does a great job of monitoring all of our volcanoes in the U.S. With an array of scientific instruments. And so we really, like a patient, we've really got this down to a fine science where we can really measure every little tremor, heartbeat, if you will, and breath of these volcanoes with all this monitoring data. So they have their some GPS instruments that measure uplift. So basically, when these locations here with these dots move upwards towards a satellite, our instruments are precise enough that we can detect movements down below a centimeter, which is really remarkable. And so what you can see is this period of time here. This is actually about a year's worth of data from summer 2020 to summer 2021. You can see a lot of these dots here are kind of in the green to yellow to red category, which shows the amount of uplift here. So what they're measuring is, and again, it's not going to sound very, very exciting, but basically in the last year or so, there's been about an inch of uplift on the volcano. Now that in of itself doesn't maybe sound like much, but it's something that's still continuing. And more importantly, the rate at which we've seen this uplift is a little bit quicker than what we've seen in the past. This area has had uplift in the past, especially in the 90s and early 2000s. There was uplift measured here, and it was a couple of inches over, several tens of years. But the rate at which it's uplifting now seems to be a little bit more rapid than what we've seen in the past. And so that's what makes this kind of interesting. Another image here that might convey the idea a little better. Here's the South Sister right here, the little white triangle. The black dots are earthquakes. So not only have we seen the uplift, we've seen a few, again, not a huge swarm, but we've seen a few shallow earthquakes in the area as well. And you can see with the colors here, again, this is just uplift. So as you get into the yellows and oranges and reds, that's indicating more uplift in that area. So again, this is for about a year-long period, this past year or so, and the amount of uplift. So most of the uplift's actually just a little bit west of the actual summit area. And all of this collectively, like, what does this mean, right? So of course, you know, it's interesting, but what does it actually boil down to? And what we think we're seeing, not conclusively, but what we think it suggests based on the depth of the earthquake and the type of uplift and the fact that they're in this volcanic region, is it's very suggestive of magma ascending closer to the surface. And as magma rises and moves up towards the summit area of a volcano, in order to make room for itself as it's trying to travel through fractures and whatever sort of plumbing systems might already be there, that magma will tend to break rocks a little bit. And as it breaks the rocks, it will produce earthquakes. Now, most of the earthquakes here are all really small, too small to be felt, but nonetheless, they're detectable with our really sensitive scientific instruments. And so pretty fascinating, a cool little story. Let me go back to the view, the south sister view. So what does this mean? Should we be worried about this? Absolutely not. This is kind of typical behavior for these stratovolcanoes. Magma might move a little bit towards the surface and then it stalls and it stays there for a while. You know, it depends on the influx of magma, that sort of thing. There's just so many variables. What we would expect to see if an eruption was imminent or likely, we would expect to see this uplift continue, possibly increase in terms of its the steepness and the rate at which the area is being uplifted. We would also expect to see a lot more earthquakes, so intense swarms of earthquakes, increasing in intensity and getting closer to the surface over time. Maybe emissions of gas, so they have spectrometers and other things there that are measuring the gas emissions coming out of the volcano. So all these things collectively might indicate that an eruption is possible. Again, it wouldn't necessarily mean it's likely or going to happen for sure. And I guess where I'm located here in southern Idaho, this is somewhat of importance to people in the Northwest, because you know, if you had a big enough eruption of the South Sister with the prevailing winds coming out of the west, we would have some ash fall here in southern Idaho, maybe down into Salt Lake City and in other kind of areas of the Pacific Northwest. So again, probably nothing will come of it. We'll just kind of keep monitoring this over the days, months, and years ahead. Like in the 90s when it had the rate of uplift, it kind of slowed down and stalled for a while, and here it is kind of reinvigorating. And so again, no cause for alarm, no signs of any eruption occurring for sure, but kind of a cool news item nonetheless, and something to maybe of interest, just kind of note and pay attention to. So hopefully that was kind of helpful, and if anything else happens with it, I'll be sure to post another video. Thanks.